Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, speaking about leadership, I mean, do we leave a lot, if not everything, to political leadership to determine how things go?
We do, unfortunately, but it's the nature of the game too. Political leadership tends to have bigger platforms than every other thing you're addressing. Because when, just as in a home, for example, whether we like it or not, the father has a big platform by virtue of his position, and he affects the atmosphere. One of the things that people who have positions of leadership do, which is why I distinguish that between political leadership, is that positions give you platforms, and platforms give you responsibility and give you opportunity to have impact. So political leadership, unconsciously by its nature, will drag and grab most of the attention. However, I've always said also that leadership does not have to wait until you have the platform. That leadership can be delivered from any level. And sometimes when I look at Nigeria, my own perception and my view is that maybe we're in a nation where our leadership may have to come from the other direction. It might have to be the ordinary man beginning to generate, because several months ago I had to give a training somewhere, and I was talking about the fact that change does not have any specific place of occurring. It could start from a small, in fact, Margaret Mead said, never doubt the power of a few committed people to change the world. She said, indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So there is, my view is like, I listened to the young man who was talking the other time about not getting the support from government. Yes, my view is there are two options you have, and neither is good. Sometimes when political leadership begins to fail, or men who have platform of leadership don't deliver on leadership, you have two choices. You can either begin to despair, in which case it's worse. You put yourself in a disastrous situation, or you begin to try to drive the little change that you can with what you have. And you'll find that as you continue to do it, research seems to indicate that when people begin to stir up change wherever they are and whatever they want to do at whatever level, it has a way of multiplying. It may not be as fast as when the people have the platform, but ultimately it has an impact. You never know what you can do to affect people's lives. I find myself privileged sometimes to affect people's lives whom I did not even know I was going to affect, just by little conversations, little discussions. So my view is, don't necessarily look at the man with the platform. Set yourself your own platforms where you understand leadership. But if you set yourself your platforms, recognize that the man at the top also has certain responsibilities by his superior platform. And that's been a gap. So that's why in a program like this, we should talk to both groups. If you're going to be at the bottom and you want to deliver leadership, you're top, you need to be able to deliver this platform. And you need to say to yourself, what is leadership? You need to understand what you are delivering. You need to understand the limitations that affect leadership. You need to recognize why leadership is not effective. And as a small person, you can deliver a lot more leadership than you think you can. Even as a copper, I found that I made a difference in my school. Just as a copper, to the point where the principal wrote to NYSC that if for any reason rather than move me somewhere, they would like me sent back. That's what I did at that level. But then you can also do it at platform. Unfortunately, many people have not even mastered the worst case scenario which we're having in Nigeria, sadly, is that many people haven't even learned to deliver leadership and understand leadership at the lower levels. And then they get to platforms because they keep on rising through the ranks, manipulating situations, and suddenly they have opportunities at massive platform levels, and they're like liners who are driving trailers.
Let's get to Markba in Abuja. Markba?
How big a role do you think that education has in this? It's a good thing that you've differentiated between political leadership and leadership at other levels. But for you, where do you think that education will have the biggest role?
Well, I think education has a big role. But then again, you've got to recognize that it may not have to be formal education. It may not be the school system. It's got to be, which is why what I said earlier on becomes valid. Our first, if I have my way, my first rule as a nation is that we should declare a leadership emergency. That we have a problem.
How would that work?
No, what it does is it's like every soundbite. It gives you the idea that we have a crisis. And then we now begin to ask ourselves the question, how can we either adjust curriculum in the system? When I went to school in those days, we had something we call civics. Now, I'm not saying civics is sufficient. Civics went out of the curriculum long ago. So that as a child you are being taught about societal responsibility. When I went to school, and it's been part of it, when I went to school, we did history and history of the world. So you saw mankind develop. Now, even the history itself is being knocked out. Even the history of the nation is being knocked out of the curriculum. And I'm sometimes wondering, are we improving or reducing our curriculum value because it's not there? So there is a part that education is contributing to this situation. But there is also a part that informal education needs to add to it. We need to stop assuming that people know something by virtue of their positions. And we need to, this education needs to come across board. I've been privileged to run trainings for people who hold high-level positions, and I'm amazed as to how little they know about what leadership means. It's amazing. They really have no idea. And what they think is that what they have attained is the evidence of leadership. And it's not. No. It's just the evidence that you're going through the system and being promoted by what the system decides that is its rules.
But the way ours is presently constituted, there are many people who have said, well, look, what do they do when they try to get involved and then they're always being knocked off because the system is skewed against them?
That's why I said we need to deliver a leadership emergency, because what an emergency does is that it makes you have to look for ways, and then it becomes a conversation. Our problem is that our system is unfortunately seeming to be controlled by people who are actually looking for power and validation by recognition.
Then they shouldn't get there in the first place.
They shouldn't get there in the first place. But somehow, for whatever reason, they seem to have grabbed the reins of power. If you look at the papers today, what you see is infighting in fact, almost ever since the government came into power, what we've seen is infighting and jostling for positions, which is actually raw level, I don't like to call it leadership. It's a power thing. No.
Markwell?
Yeah, I asked that question not just at the level of the person who is going to be a leader, but also at the level of the people who elect the leadership. Some people will say that the way it's evolved over the years, I think someone wrote on that, is that, you know, the elites initially used to select amongst themselves, and later on they made it a little more inclusive. You had to have certain qualifications, but now we don't need to have any. The only people who need any qualification are the people who are seeking the elected positions. The people who vote for them do not need to have any qualification at all. Do you think that needs to change?
Well, it does, but then the question is, with modern developments, you have an argument. I mean, the ancient Greeks, like you pointed out, actually, not everybody voted. We use them as the example of democracy. Democracy in ancient Greece was not one man, one vote. It was one qualified man, one vote, which meant there was a challenge as to who exactly could vote. But I think with the development of the modern world and with the way the modern world has become more egalitarian, it will be difficult to enforce that. So since we cannot get that back, I think the next best thing is to begin to work on a situation where there is a lot more visibility and opportunity given to people for an expression, like what you're doing here on channels now, is allowing more people to talk about it. I've said before that,
and hoping that they take action as well.
Yes, I've said before that never assume that it's not going to happen, that it's not happening, because the more you talk about it, the more you write about it, the more you create circumstances like Suleiman invited me to a program with the Ansarudin group where we're talking about leadership. The more you create that scenario, ultimately, the better the educational level, starting with awareness. Because actually the number one thing to grow in anything is the awareness that there is something not happening. So even if all you achieve in 1, 10, 5, 6 years is awareness, where a nation is a long-term project. It's not a 2-year project, basically. It's a long-term project. And that's why I said at the beginning that as a nation, we need to stop thinking of ourselves as a short-term thing and start saying, okay, fine, we have a leadership situation. Now, can we create scenarios? It means from our different angles, we begin to address it. If Channels is doing it, we're doing it on radio, we're doing it on television, we're doing it in the newspapers, and we are creating forums that we can create ourselves at small levels